What's up guys, Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp quick tutorial for you. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about how I would model a deck on the back of this house inside of SketchUp. So one of the things we're going to try to do when we model this is we're going to try to model this with smart modeling techniques. So things that are going to save us time and make changes and things like that easier in the future. If you're looking for more great SketchUp tips, make sure you check out my free SketchUp tips guide at TheSketchUpEssentials.com/tips. Now let's go ahead and just jump into it. So the house model itself is a model that I downloaded from the Placemaker building bundle, which is a bundle of models that you get when you download the extension Placemaker. I will link to Placemaker in the notes down below. But what I wanted to do is I just wanted to come in here and I just wanted to model a quick deck off of the back side of this building. So here's the front side, here's the back side, and I just wanted to model a deck coming off of this back side. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start off, and usually what I like to do is rough out the footprint of the deck itself, so however long that's going to be. So in this case, I'm going to assume this is going to come out like 14 feet from the side of the building or something like that, and we're just going to draw a rectangle across all of this. So once I've kind of got these 2 points drawn, I can just draw a rectangle in here. Now I have kind of an idea of what the footprint of this deck is going to be, and I may have to move it up or down in order to interface it with the door here, but I really just want to give myself that idea. And so one thing to note about this is if any of this was raw geometry, it might make sense for you to take this and maybe group it, just so it doesn't merge with any of this geometry. But what we're going to do in this case is I'm going to start off and I'm going to model out the framing for the top here. And so to start off with the top, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this right here, this plane that I drew. I'm going to draw this up, or I'm going to move this up using the move tool, and then I'm going to move it down whatever the thickness of the boards that I'm going to put on the top of this are going to be. So in this case, assuming we did like a 2x8 or something like that, then those are actually going to have a thickness of 1.5. So I'm just going to move this down 1.5 inches. And so now when I come in here and I start modeling out my deck, they're not going to stick up above the bottom of this door. And this has a little piece sticking out the end here, which we're going to go ahead and just kind of build our deck as if all the boards are going to run in front of this here. But there might be different ways that you would do that. You might also just take this and, whoops. You might also just move this 1.5 inches down from whatever your lowest point is, like this. That way those boards will kind of line up nicely with this. It kind of depends on what you're looking for. But what I would do in this case is I'm going to start off and I'm just going to draw a board that's going to run across the top here. So when I draw this board, I'm assuming these are going to be 2x8s. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a rectangle standing up off of here. And I'm going to tap the right arrow key to lock this rectangle to this axis, but I'm just going to draw in the dimensions of a 2x4, which is going to be, in this case, 7.25 inches, or 7.25, comma 1.5. And so what that's going to do is that's going to give me my first 2x4, or 2x8. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to push pull this all the way across. And actually, before I even do that, probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on it, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to make it a component. So when I make it a component, I'm just going to call this 2x8 decking. So now that's a component, and we're going to push pull this across like this until it's level with this other side. And so you can see how once we do that, we have our first board showing up in here. And if you wanted to create like a gap in here, you definitely could. Like, let's say you wanted this to be over like 1/8 of an inch or something like that. You could do that. And actually that's kind of helpful because now when we use the move tool in copy mode to create copies of this, you can actually use that gap because these boards are usually going to have some kind of gap in them. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this. I'm going to activate the move tool, and I'm going to set my base point at this point against the wall, not on the corner here. That way, when I tap the control key to turn on copy mode and I single click, then I click again, you can see how this makes that copy with that 1/8 inch gap on this board. And so now what we want to do is we want to use the array function in SketchUp in order to copy this across. And so since my move tool is still active, I'm just going to type in ×10 and hit the enter key. And you can see how that doesn't give me nearly enough boards, so I'm just going to use trial and error in order to get the right number of boards. So you can see I'm typing in ×20 and then ×22 and hitting the enter key. And that's just using the move tool in copy mode, creating an array, and I will link to a video about that in case you're confused about that. But one problem we have here is this last board is going to need to be cut in order to fit, but we don't want to just take this and just push-pull it, because you can see how it's a copy of all of these other components in here, and you don't want to adjust those. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to right-click on this. We're just going to select the option for Make Unique. And so when we make that unique, we're breaking the link between these boards and this board. And now I can come in and I can adjust this last board so that it lines up with the edge of my deck footprint. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to model out the support framing, and that's going to be fairly easy. All we're going to do is, I'm not 100% sure what size these joists would be, so we'll go ahead and say they're going to be a 2x8 again. So I'm just going to draw a rectangle in here, and I'm just going to type in 1.5, 7.25, the dimensions of a 2x8. And so we're just going to take this and we're just going to push-pull that across to this corner. And then one little trick that you can use in here on this end is, because we know this is going to have a thickness of, since we know this is going to have a thickness of 1.5, because that's the thickness of a 2x8, you can use the push-pull tool, but if you tap the control key, it's going to go into create new face mode. Then you can just type in 1.5. That's going to push-pull this end back, and it's going to give you a gap here, or a piece here, that you can then extrude along this edge. So you can use this in create new face mode in order to push-pull this face across and really quickly create that framing member. And so I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to reverse the faces on these. And one thing I like to do as I do this is I like to start grouping my different parts and pieces. So like, for example, this wood framing piece that runs around the edge here, I want to triple click on this and right click and make it a group so that it's not merging with this geometry. Same thing, and I should have done this before with all of these 2x8s, but we can use the outliner to do this. And the outliner is a great way to keep your model organized. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to select all of this 2x8 decking. I'm just going to right click on that and make that a group. And so I'm just going to rename that one decking. I'm going to rename this one joist framing. And I may take these two and actually put them in their own group inside the outliner, and I will link to a video about the outliner. It's just a great way to keep your model organized. And so you can see how we're kind of getting some Z-fighting in here. That's because that original plane that I created is still sitting in here. So I'm just going to delete that out because I don't need it anymore. So now I've got the top of my deck created in here, and if you wanted to, you could also come in and model the support framing across here. And so the way that that would work is, in this case, this would be 7.25, 1.5, and I would probably just double click on this and go ahead and make this a component and make this something like, call it something like joist framing. And go ahead and just make a copy across just like this. And then what you can do is you can use the move tool in copy mode in order to create a copy across to whatever your spacing is. So let's say, for example, that these needed to be 12 inches on center. You could just use the move tool in copy mode to create a copy here, and then just type in ×10 or ×11. And just keep typing in times and then a value and hitting the enter key until you get the number of framing pieces that you want. So you can see how it was really easy for me to come in here and add those. Then I can just take those, and in this case, I'm probably just going to move those down into this joist framing group that I created. And so now I've got the top of the deck, And I've got the framing in here. And probably what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to model out some support posts. So I'm just going to come in here and model out a support post. And we'll assume this is going to be like a 4x4. So the real dimensions of that would be 3.5 by 3.5. And I don't want to get too in depth with these. I'm going to make them fairly simple, but I'm just going to double click on this, right click and make it a component, and we'll just call this 4x4 posts. And I think it's probably going to be easier to go ahead and make copies of this now. So I'm just going to use the move tool in copy mode, and I'm going to copy this across on the green axis. And so I'm going to find whatever this point is, where this is going to go, and I'm just going to make a copy here. I'm going to make a copy here. And then when we're copying this across, probably what I'm going to do is use the move tool in copy mode to copy this all the way across here. And then I'm going to type in divided by, and maybe something like 4. So that'll create 4 evenly spaced copies between this point and this point. And so now I have all those these posts kind of roughed out. Now, because they're copies of the same component, I can just come in here and I can just pull one of those down. And you can see how, because that's a component, these others get copied down as well. And you could get more in depth with this if you wanted to. There's other ways to do the framing. This may not even be the way the framing looks, but you should be able to use this as kind of a framework for how you could create your framing on something like this. And then probably what I would do, because I already have these posts created, is I would just use the move tool in copy mode and just inference a copy here, and a copy here. And quite honestly, you might not have a post right here because this is probably going to tie into your house, but we're going to go ahead and leave it modeled that way anyway. But then I'm just going to take those posts, I'm just going to select all of them, and I'm going to put them in a group. And I'm going to put that group inside my deck group in my outliner as well. And the only reason I'm doing that is because that makes this a lot easier to come in here and find things and adjust things a little bit later. You don't have to do this, but I like keeping my models organized when I'm doing this. And so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to model in our handrails. And obviously your handrails can look like a bunch of different things. In this case, we're just going to do something really simple. So I'm just going to assume that you're just going to have a series of 4x4 posts. So I'm just going to type in 4,4. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull this up. And we'll say this is going to have a height of 3'6". And I'm just going to triple click on this, and I'm going to make this a component as well. And we'll just call this vertical rail post. And what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set my spacing for these. So I'm assuming that I'm going to have a vertical post maybe every 6 feet or something like that. And then I'll just type in ×3. And then you can see how you get kind of a weird gap on this corner. So there's a couple different ways that you could handle this gap. So you could either put this post right here a lot closer on this corner, or you could do that on this corner, or you could just assume that your railing was going to be spaced a little bit differently. So maybe in this case what I would do is I would start from the corners so that you get more uniformity off of the corner. And then I would make my copies this way. So in this case, we'll say we had 6 feet again. We'll do it ×2, and then I'll just add one more post in here. And so then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line probably about 8 inches up off the ground, and I'm just going to rough out the shape of like a 2x6 support down here that your pickets could sit off of. So in this case, I would do 0.75, 5.5, and then 1.5. And that's just me drawing the size of the 2x6. And then there's two ways you could do this as well. You could either push-pull this individually for each one of these, or you could push-pull this all the way to the end. For the sake of speed, I'm just going to push-pull this all the way to the end, then I'm just going to triple-click on it, and I'm going to make a group. And we'll just call that something like bottom support framing. And so once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a copy of this object using the move tool in copy mode, kind of like this. And so that's going to give me kind of my top post or my top framing along this. And then we'll come back in and add the vertical pickets in a second. But the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assume that this is going to have like a 2x6 sitting on top of it. It might even be like a 2x8. So let's say it was a 2x6, then I would just rough out the size of the 2x6. I'd probably go ahead and do that over here. And then I could just push-pull that across. And note that you're going to have a little bit of overhang on this back side, so you might want to take this and in this case your overhang is going to be 3/4 of an inch. So you're just going to push-pull this out 3/4 of an inch. And so now I want to model out my vertical pickets, which can get a little bit tricky. But what I want to do in this case is my assumption is that these pickets are going to be square on top of this point right here. So in this case, that means these are going to be 1.5 by 1.5. And so what I want to do is I want to create them kind of equally spaced inside of this object. And so the way that I'm going to do that is, and so in order to set the spacing on this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line from here to here. That's going to give me the length between these 2 points, but then I'm just going to take this and I'm going to select the option. I'm going to right click on the line. I'm going to select the option for divide. When I select the option for divide, what that's going to allow me to do is that's going to allow me to come in here and that's going to divide this up into a certain number of segments. So in this case, if I divide this into like 7 segments, or sorry, if I divide this into like 9 segments, you can see how this tells me my length is going to be 7.5 inches. So I'm just going to use that to kind of rough this out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this to this first point here. Then I'm just going to use the move tool in copy mode, and we're just going to create copies in here. So I'm going to click on this point, and then I'm going to type in ×5. No, it's going to be ×7. And hit the enter key, and what that's going to do is that's going to create 7 copies equally spaced along this point. And then since these are components, I can take these and I can push-pull these up like this. So, and I'm actually going to go find a different style in here. So I'm just going to change this to architectural design style, just so you can see this a little bit better. But since these are equally spaced, it's really simple to just come in here and select these pickets. And then in this case, we're just going to use the bottom point of this corner right here. And I'm just going to use the move tool in copy mode to copy these across. So you can see how that gets really easy to do. And then for this last one over here, spacing gets a little bit weird, but we can still kind of do the same thing, or we use the move tool in copy mode to create 2 of these across. And you can see how there's actually not enough room for 2 of them, so we're just going to erase this out. That'll give us 1. And so one trick we can use to save us time is if we come in here and we select these pickets, which I could probably put in a group, but I'm not going to in this case, and we just use the rotate tool in copy mode, we can actually create a copy of these running across really easily without having to come in here and make a whole bunch of changes. So you can see how in this case, the only thing that's wrong with that is this isn't quite lined up with the edge. So we can just move this across to this edge, and now we've got the copy of our pickets in here. And then we can use the move tool in copy mode again in order to copy that across. So I could type in ×4. And you can see how, again, we get some kind of weird spacing on this end. There's 2 ways that you could do that. You could either make these longer on the end here, or you could do what I'm going to do, and you could just erase out these extra pieces. Whoops, and not my house. and then just move this piece back. And you can see how the nice thing about using the move tool in copy mode is you don't have to set your base point on this object over here. I can use this as my base point and make a copy of this object while clicking over here, if you saw how that worked. So that's a really easy way to create things like spacing. And then I'm going to go ahead before I forget, and I'm just going to take this, deselect that object, and I'm just going to make a copy of this across the way here. And for the sake of speed, I'm going to leave this kind of running into the house right here. You might model this railing out a little bit differently because this is running into the house, but for the sake of this tutorial, I think you get the idea of what I'm talking about. But then we can just do the same thing over here, where we can use the rotate tool in copy mode, and we can select these objects. I'm just going to make a copy across here, and then I'm just going to move it so that these objects line up the way that they're supposed to. And then I'm just going to come in here, because these aren't components, I can do this. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to pull this across for each one of these. And so now you could come back in here and you could regroup all of your different stuff inside your outliner to make sure everything is organized. But you can see how this is a pretty painless way to create a deck inside of SketchUp. There are some things we might work on, like the way this corner looks or something like that. But using these principles is a lot easier than coming in and modeling every single one of these manually. So leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought. Was this helpful to you? Is this something that you might use? I just love having that SketchUp conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Every little bit helps, even if it's only $1 a month. So make sure you check out that link in the notes down below. But in any case, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.